Hey guys, my name is Ryan, and welcome to Overwatch Central. Today we're talking about something that Blizzard has been doing to the new heroes as have been added. It's a very deliberate thing that Blizzard is trying to do, and it's actually quite smart coming out of them. We'll be talking about exactly what that is. There's not too much mystery to it. And then I also wanted to talk about a bit of speculation and theory onto why Sigma, the new hero additions, might also be leading towards Overwatch 2 to an extent. As I said, major speculation, so we'll talk about that at the end of the video. I did also want to shout out HyperX. We've been working with them for quite some time now. Both myself and Miska use their mice, keyboards, headsets. Even the RAM in our PC is from HyperX. They make an assortment of good stuff, all fairly cheap and all very professional and work very well. So if you want to take a look, description below. Every hero in Overwatch comes under one of the three major roles: tank, DPS and support. That's fairly easy to understand. However, we all kind of know as well that in each of these roles there are specific sub-roles, I suppose, to an extent. For DPS, you have hit scan and projectile, flankers versus snipers. There's lots of different ways that you can categorize the DPS. For the tanks and supports, it's a lot more straightforward. For the tanks, you have a main tank, which is typically a barrier tank, and then you have an off tank, which doesn't have a barrier, but provides some form of utility. For tanks, this could be mitigation, like D.Va's defense matrix or Zarya's bubbles, or just outright damage that these heroes can provide. But generally, the difference between a main tank and an off tank is that a main tank has a barrier and is usually leading the line, being the spearhead of the team, whereas the off tank is usually following behind without a form of barrier. And typically you wouldn't want to run two main tanks or two off tanks in your lineup. But what does this have to do with the video? Why are Blizzard being really smart about these changes? Well, it actually came from something that Yeatle said to me about Sigma, and it came from the question, is Sigma a main tank or an off tank?
A lot of people ask that, and I kind of think that from here on out that there's not going to be like this whole main tank off tank thing, that from now on it's just going to be like a bunch of flex tanks. Because if you think about the main tanks in Overwatch, you think Winston, Reinhardt, Orisa, they're all just super simple heroes at their kit, right? Reinhardt swings, Winston tases, whatever. We're 30 heroes in or more. What is this, 31? And Blizzard's kind of like, there's no more simple ideas anymore. So I think from here on out, all the tanks are going to be like more complicated, and that's going to make them more viable in like different compositions, not just main tank, off tank.
The key thing that I wanted to mention in this video is that Blizzard have been doing this for quite some time. I think every new hero release up to Orisa has been Blizzard's deliberate attempt to try and blur the lines to make sure that they don't make any more main tanks or off tanks. They try to make something that can really sort of follow suit in both. The heroes since Orisa that have been added into the game are as follows. You have Doomfist, Moira, Brigitte, Wrecking Ball, Ashe, Baptiste, and then Sigma. We're going to get rid of the DPS heroes out of this lineup because they don't really apply at all, really. And there's no real strict rules in what DPS you can play together. You can play two projectile heroes, you can play two hit scans, you can play two snipers, most definitely, two flankers, one sniper, one flanker, one projectile, one sniper. It doesn't matter as much, certainly in comparison to main tanks where you can run two main tanks, but it's often at the expense of losing out utility or damage. But certainly playing two off tanks is a big problem. Not having a barrier can cause a lot of issues. But seeing as we're mentioning the tanks here, let's talk about Wrecking Ball and Sigma. Is Wrecking Ball a main tank or an off tank? Is Sigma a main tank or an off tank? There's no clear-cut answer, and that's the thing. Blizzard were very deliberate on making sure that Wrecking Ball was neither a main tank or an off tank, and Sigma wasn't really a main tank or an off tank. Even Blizzard's choice of words is very deliberate in saying that Sigma isn't a main tank, he's a barrier tank. For supports, it's a little bit more vague. We're going to ignore what the pros use to differentiate a main support versus a flex support because it depends on stuff like shot calling and freeing yourself up to do stuff like that. But generally, there's no rule to this. You have the main and flex supports, the main supports being supports that can provide a lot of healing. Supports that you really want to be running at least one of them. Flex supports are the rest of them, I suppose. They don't provide as much healing, in fact they don't provide an awful lot of healing in comparison, but they do provide, much like off tanks, a lot of utility and other bits and pieces that they can do. An example would be Zenyatta. Other than his ultimate, he doesn't provide an awful lot of healing, but he does bring a Discord Orb that increases damage taken by an enemy target that can be used aggressively, as well as being able to do quite a lot of damage himself. Lucio is also another great example of a flex support. His speed boost is really good for utility, and whilst he can provide a decent amount of healing. It's not as consistent as some of the other heroes, for example, Anna or Mercy. And much like off-tanks, typically you don't want to be playing two flex supports together, like Zenyatta or Lucio. Yes, it used to be very good in the dive meta, but that's because dive targets realistically didn't require much healing. They could look after themselves. Blizzard are trying to do to the tanks what they've managed to do for the supports. Whilst there is general rules that the supports do follow under, as I said, main supports and flex supports, you can pick and choose whichever supports that you want in a combination, and they're still quite strong. Whilst we're not in a point where there's a set meta, no doubt there'll be a point where if you're not running, say, Anna Mercy together, then people will say that you're throwing. I definitely believe that that's on the horizon at some point, but you can run Anna Baptiste, Baptiste Zenyatta, Zenyatta Mercy, Mercy Lucio. All of these combinations of supports work. They might be better in some situations or overall general compositions. The most important element is that you can run a lot of supports together, A and B, B and C, C and A, D and E, etc, and you're not really running into any problems. Even New Brigitte works alongside a lot of these supports. But for the tanks, it's a much different story. You kinda always need to follow that formula of having a main barrier tank and then an off tank to follow. It's almost like those roles have been defined already. So that's why Blizzard have been very deliberate in making sure that Wrecking Ball and Sigma especially, and no doubt all of the new tanks that we're going to get in the future, don't fill a main tank or an off tank role. Even though Sigma has a shield, which typically correlates to being a main tank, he isn't a main tank. And Wrecking Ball, whilst he doesn't have a barrier, can be deemed as a main tank. You see what I mean? And certainly since the addition of Sigma, that's become a lot more obvious, and even Blizzard themselves are saying at this point that this is what they want to do. I just wanted to highlight why I think it's quite clever coming out of Blizzard, and why we're getting very weird heroes like Wrecking Ball, Baptiste and Sigma that don't fill a predetermined role, because Blizzard are trying to destroy those roles to make sure that there's only tanks, DPS and supports, not main tanks or off tanks, that is going to dictate your play even more, especially with role lock coming into the game. I hope all of that made sense. If you still have any more questions, let me know in the comments. But now I wanted to talk about why I think Sigma especially is a sign that Overwatch 2 is on the horizon, and what's the correlation there. One workshop game mode that I've seen cropping up ever since Sigma was added into the game was Overwatch vs Talon. But the one thing that clicked when I was checking out these game modes, as well as all of the amazing RP ones of course, is how much time and effort, and I suppose lore to an extent, Blizzard has put into Talon. Sombra was announced at BlizzCon in 2016, almost 3 years ago, and it was one of the pinnacle moments, I suppose, of Overwatch. The excitement that the animated short brought, the newest hero, the newest BlizzCon ever since Overwatch went live. People were very excited. In fact, I don't think anybody was more excited at that point. Ever since, it's been a slow downhill drive when it comes to hype around Overwatch. But how many Talon heroes did we have before Sombra? It was only Reaper and Widowmaker as far as I remember. There were bad characters in the game, sure, but none were under that affiliation of Talon. Ever since Sombra, we have had Doomfist, Moira, Baptiste, Sigma, with story introduction to Noyan, Maximilian, Morga, and Predator Bot. That is 8 new Talon heroes that they have introduced. Some are no doubt going to be new heroes like Morga, and no doubt we're going to learn more about the likes of Predator Bot, Noyan, and more Talon heroes. This is my hot take on this, by the way. I think that Blizzard are dedicating more time to Talon because they want to make it a faction in another game. Kind of Horde Alliance to an extent. I don't understand why Blizzard have dedicated so much time in order to embellish and establish the Talon faction. In fact, they've been focusing more on Talon and Overwatch at this point. The story of Overwatch hasn't gone anywhere since the original recall of Winston. A lot of the comics and stories have followed the likes of Zarya, finding out more about Sombra, which isn't really related to Overwatch. Torbjorn traveling the world, even though he is part of Overwatch, he isn't, again, involved in what's going on. You have the Diva shot, Reinhardt coming back to Overwatch, and then Asher McCree. Now, my theory on Overwatch 2 is that it's going to be somewhat connected to the game that we're playing now. I think it's going to be like a full PvE game, maybe not like looter shooter, but I think it's going to be one of those like online multiplayer games that's mainly focused on PvE. Fingers crossed it's like Borderlands, that's my hope. But I feel like there is generally going to be a Overwatch side and a Talon side with the characters in the game now, maybe acting as like NPCs. Like I mentioned Borderlands, it's like Lilith in Borderlands 1 is a playable character, in Borderlands 2 and 3, she's like an NPC that travels alongside you. Imagine that, but with like Tracer and Reaper and stuff like that. But Blizzard are putting a lot of stock in Talon right now. They're really building up this enemy faction to a point where I could see whatever game that Overwatch 2 may end up being, having a focus around pick a faction. But I hope that you're understanding the point I'm trying to make. I feel like there's going to be some big story beats within Overwatch, but I definitely feel that whatever we're going towards may set up a new game that may launch next year or the year after that. But let me know what you think of that. As I said, just speculation, but I think there's a lot of credit to it personally. But I am curious to know if you think that I'm talking a load of crap. Thanks for watching anyway. And again, big shout out to HyperX. We've been working with them for so long. It's so cool to be working alongside a company that both myself and Miska were using beforehand anyway. So really glad to be a part of that crew. As I said, they do all sorts of stuff if you're looking for a new mouse, keyboard, headset, whatever. Even a new microphone. Check that all out in the description and comments below. Thanks for watching. Take care. We'll see you next time.